Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show, whether it's politics, personal development, we help you forge the life you truly want to live and build a community to support you in that journey. Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch Ray's Talk Show anywhere you can download and upload a podcast. Whether it's uploading, downloading, streaming, playing on the iTunes Store, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, anywhere you can download a podcast. Thank you so much for checking us out. You can also check out our website, rayspodcast.com. That's RAYS podcast.com. Thank you so much. And again, you can always email us at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. And I want to, first of all, give a shout out to a new listener to the show. Cynthia W. is her Twitter handle. I don't know her last name, but Cynthia sent me a tweet the other day nudging me saying, Rafi, where's the podcast, Holmes? And I want to apologize. It's been way too long since we've had this formal conversation. I know we've all been chatting, tweeting, DMing, Facebook Living our collective journeys here in this new world. And I've just been so busy in that world, organizing, mobilizing, and just on the JOB and in my personal capacities and professional responsibilities, just doing the work, and just haven't had the space lately to get on the mic here with friends and colleagues to have these discussions. But we are back, and we're not going anywhere. And again, thank you so much for joining Ray's Talk Show, and thank you again, Cynthia W, for the nudge, because we have to get out here, and we're actually going to be posting 2 episodes this week. So check out Friday's episode. We have a very special interview with a Latina leader that's taking a lot of leadership in our community, as always, but also in particular helping other women get engaged in the political process. So check out my interview, my conversation with Patricia Campos at the end of the week here on Ray's Talk Show. On this episode, I really want to focus our conversation on, from my perspective, for what I've seen this last few weeks in the midst of the beginning of this Trump, some would say abomination or Trumpfliction, as I've coined it, the beginning of his administration, and the lessons of the resistance. Hashtag resist. That is something that we're very focused on, and I want to have a little chat with you all today about the resistance and how I feel it's going and the validity of it. Some people question sort of even the approach, right, around either peaceful protest and other forms of resistance to this Trumpfliction. A little bit about what I see as sort of how the resistance and the way it's manifested so far, in almost all beautiful ways, is really one pillar of a 4-part strategy, 4 buckets, if you will, of things I think we need to focus on, and we'll talk about that. Then we're going to have a conversation with a great friend of ours from Miami, Tomas Kennedy. Tomas is an organizer and activist in South Florida, and he's part of the resistance related to Mayor Carlos Gimenez's agreement to conform and cooperate with one of President Trump's executive actions, specifically related to sanctuary cities. Very controversial, and we'll talk about that with Tomas and what Tomas is doing to organize people in his community to have their voices heard, particularly the immigrant community in South Florida around that issue. And then at the end of the show, we'll chat a little bit about what to look out for, what's happening in the headlines, to try to blow through all the smoke of the gaslighting that's taking place, to really get at the things we need to focus on as we continue taking responsibility not only for ourselves but our democracy, because the future of our democracy is unfortunately in doubt at this point, and we need to stand up for ourselves, and that is not hyperbolic. Again, thank you so much for joining us. You can catch, again, Ray's Podcast and Ray's Talk Show anywhere on social media. Twitter is where I'm probably most active, at RAYS Podcast. But you can also catch us on Facebook and Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. So definitely follow us on various social media platforms. And we're always available on email, podcastrays@gmail.com. So the first piece I wanted to discuss in terms of the big takeaway, the lessons of the resistance, which really sort of got jumped off at the Women's March. Much respect. I must know. I'm proud to say dozens, if not a few hundred women personally that attended various marches around the country, coast to coast. So much respect, un orgullo to know these very powerful women who are leading the way. And I think us being comfortable with letting women lead this movement, even beyond the Women's March and around women's specific issues. I think it's very important. I've said that, and I'm going to keep saying it. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I want people to get out of the lessons of the resistance from my perspective is that this is absolutely working. If you look at the reversal around the implementation of the nasty executive order, anti-Muslim, anti-person of color, as far as I'm concerned, a green card, the one that disallowed green card holders from coming in the United States and visa holders through our activism, our resistance at those airports, and the subsequent actions that take place, the legal actions have led to that being halted and even reversed. In the case of green card holders, even before the legal challenge, the delay on nominations, and we're going to talk about that later. The slowdown. Have you noticed, y'all? They ain't talking about repealing ACA all of a sudden. There's lots of interesting language that's coming out about how we need to, we need to look into this, and this immediate repeal and even repeal and replace language is slowed up. And as recently as yesterday, in his Fox interview, President Trump discussed the idea that there'll be a new plan, but it'll take a year or two. So they're really slowing up on that, and that is because of us, y'all. And we have to continue to be vigilant about pushing back against repealing the ACA. We're not saying there aren't things we can't change. There's certainly things about a very complicated law that need to be dealt with. There's no question about that. Nobody's doubting that. But let's work together to find solutions to smaller problems and not just, rip up the entire thing and literally put people's lives on the line. And if you don't believe that, understand very simply, there's women. Let's talk about the women in our community again. A woman gets breast cancer, or a debilitating pre-existing condition, whether it's a woman or a man. But I just think of all the women that have breast cancer in this country that would be kicked off their insurance if the ACA was repealed, without an immediate replacement that included supporting their health. And, that's just is not going to happen on our watch. And we're going to be vigilant about that. Members of Congress are hiding. You can't call. I call Senator Pat Toomey every freaking day. Nobody picks up his phone anywhere. His phone lines don't work. They don't even leave voice. There's nothing. They go to dead air. These people are hiding. They're not going to town halls. They're not scheduling public events. They're hiding from people. And they specifically said, there was a congressman in Colorado, said these women they're bothering. I can't get away from these women. Unbelievable. This man is so insecure in himself that he's scared of women who just want to speak to him about their First Amendment rights and discuss issues that impact them as voters in his district. What kind of insecurity is that? So this is working, because the bottom line is, when you're hiding, let me tell you something, you hiding, that means you up to something. But like I say, if you're doing the right thing, if you really feel in your heart that, corazón, this is the right thing to do, then you'll talk to people, even people that don't agree with you, about why it's important. If you're hiding, there's a reason you're freaking hiding. And the bottom line is, when you're a member of Congress, you can only hide but so long. And when you keep hiding, even people that aren't necessarily disagreeing with you realize and stand up for a second and say, well, don't we pay his salary with our tax dollars, this person? Because, by the way, it's men that do this. I don't hear any women, Republicans or anybody, Congresswomen, hiding from anybody. On the contrary, the only ones that have any sort of spine, look at the DeVos nomination, are the women, Republican women in the Senate. So this is absolutely working. It is maybe the biggest movement, broadest movement in the history of our country already, from a citizen perspective. Obviously, civil rights movement was very big, but it was a relatively smaller, target market there. But very impactful. Certainly the most impactful movement of our country's history. But in terms of the impact, the amount of millions and millions of people have already been in the street, and overwhelmingly peaceful. So we have to continue to do this. And what I would say is that understand that it's important to stay out there, stay full throttle and resist, and just understand that this is just one pillar of a four-part strategy that we'll talk more about in a second. Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is, again, your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you for joining us. And, you know, whether it's politics, personal development, we're here to help you on your journey to forge ahead on the path and the life you want to live. And it can take many interesting forms. Again, this show was not started as a political podcast per se, but because of a combination of the time we're living in and combined with, you know, some expertise, some experience I have in this area, I felt compelled to really take the show in that direction. We are going to continue to have interviews with people to discuss personal development, our shows with entrepreneurs, experts in their fields, just people with amazing stories. We're going to incorporate that into future episodes. And in fact, we've got a few episodes that have actually been already recorded in the past several months that will be released in the coming days on the show with some really interesting friends of ours from the podcast. So definitely continue to check out. If you like that kind of content, we're going to continue to provide it for you. And we'll see how it goes. But the political stuff is very top of mind and very timely. And I think, honestly, still does speak to that personal development piece of us, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out through this calling, you know, what does this mean for my career? What does this mean for skills I need to develop? What does this mean for me personally? I mean, many of you had never gotten this engaged in the political process. Maybe voted and maybe paid attention, but not the kind of intensity that we've seen, which, you know, on some level, it's a shame we have to get to this point to go through all this stress, but ultimately it's going to make us a better democracy and a better Americans. So I encourage people to continue to resist and continue to get engaged and stretch out to your comfort zone and show us what you got. So again, I was saying that the marches, the resistance movement that we've created absolutely is necessary, absolutely is the way to go. We don't need to wait any longer. We see what this man's about. This man's about a tyrant with an ultra-right-wing, autocratic, kleptocratic agenda. So we've seen enough of what we have to say. And by the way, incredibly racist. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I'm not saying everyone who voted for him is a racist. But, you know, I mean, let's forget. I mean, this entire government, senior government, is almost completely white. I mean, this is 2017. So, and all this. And by the way, you ever notice that no matter how Russia could be this guy Putin could be literally one of the worst 5 people in the world, and never says a bad thing about him. What inherently evil is about the Chinese exactly? I mean, yeah, maybe they're competitors, but you know, they could probably treat their people better from a human rights perspective. But I don't see the Chinese leaders and government looking to, I don't know. It's just, you know, I mean, you got to put connect the dots here. And certainly Mexican immigrants are not the problem. And much respect to those Super Bowl commercials, eh? That was interesting. Corporate America's on our side. We'll talk about that in a second. So in terms of the movement, I think, again, this movement building, being visible, going to town halls. You know, there's going to be a set of town halls and activities. They're going to have a presidential week recess, believe it or not. These people just started working a few weeks ago. They're already on vacation in Congress. So get engaged. Go to these events. If you can find a town hall in your congressional district or your Senate office, go visit a senator. They're around. They're going to be around a lot in February. In person, you want to stay in their face about the issues that you care about, that we care about. But that's just one part of the puzzle. I think another part of the energy outside of the movement building that continues to take place is electoral organizing. Now look, not all of y'all are going to get involved in this part, but we need a lot of energy, a lot of your pent-up energy involved in this piece. There's still, particularly minority communities and young and millennial and younger communities, we still need a lot of voter registration done. Voter registration, there tends to be a lot of energy around it almost exclusively within 90 days of an election, presidential election to be specific. And it's very difficult for us to raise resources for this kind of work. It's incredibly important. If you look at the numbers, if you just look at it from a Latino electoral perspective, our biggest challenge is not turning out Latinos. That's a challenge. Our biggest challenge is registering people to vote so that they're eligible to be in the pool to turn out the vote. So if the people that are registered, we do a pretty fair job getting them out, typically, at least in federal elections, or at least in presidential elections. But the problem is that there's this large group of people, almost half of our community, that's eligible but not even registered. They're not even in the game. They can't even get they don't got a uniform to be on the field, much less, you know, get a carry. And so that, there's nothing wrong. And we'll have episodes in the coming weeks where we can talk to people about how to start voter registration campaigns, what you do. But let me tell you something. If you're talking all this mess online, you got to make sure every primo, every cousin, every neighbor, every friend, everybody just turned 18, just got their citizenship. Everyone in your network needs to be registered to vote. And you start voting in whatever elections it is, school board, special elections. There's elections all the time. We need them in the pool. That's a very powerful statement. The other part of this is that, and we're going to have our next guest, Patricia Campos, who's going to be on our next episode. She's an authority on this subject. We need to get people, especially young people, especially women, especially Latinos, especially diverse communities, particularly within our younger communities, to run for office. And so, again, there's opportunities in your school board. There's opportunities. You'd be shocked how, not saying easy, but how relatively reasonable it is to run for office locally, or you can make a big impact, and we can start making waves through state parties. That's how you get in the pipeline of leadership. I'll repeat this. I mean, 2 years before anyone knew who he was nationally, Senator Obama was a state senator, and he had never been an elected official before. So, running for office is not something we should shy away from. The other part is strategic get out the vote efforts. We've got there's some really cool resources online where you can find what's your closest swing congressional district. So if you're interested in that level of this, and you most likely you live either in or within a reasonable travel distance of a swing congressional district, you could start registering people in that area. You can start you start making connections with people in that community. You can start identifying where you can contribute to scaring the bejesus out of an elected official going into next year, because a lot of times these congressional races, 5,000 votes, 7,000 votes, and it could be the difference. So, and even if we can't knock them out, we can get them thinking twice before they make votes on certain things. So, movement building, electoral organizing. The third piece, the economic coordination. And this is an area that I'm not a particular expert in, and I want to have other people on the show to discuss this, but I think we have to be thinking about these Super Bowl ads, right? Like supporting corporations, small businesses that are supportive of our agenda. When our dollar gets mobilized, that's going to make a tremendous impact. And so we have to find those connections, support your small business owners. Maybe this is a time where we have to really think about, how we develop our parallel economy, as it relates to, investing in credit unions, building financial institutions that can lend to our communities that have harder times, and working people that have harder times getting capital to start a small business, to potentially get a mortgage. So those are the kind of outside the box traditional organizers and political types don't really think about really on the left. And we have to start thinking that way. We have to start building those capacities. And so also philanthropy, if you're lazy and you don't want to go do nothing, but you care about what's going on, there's all kind of things you can donate to. There's community organizations or advocacy that service people. There's advocacy organizations. ACLU, you've seen a boom with their visibility. They've been raising millions of dollars online to fight these court fights. They're going to need the money. You got to pay these lawyers a little something, There's all kind of organizations and all kind of political candidates, whether they're already in office and you like them, they're the kind of people you want to support, or new people in the game. So, let's leverage the resources that we have. And the last thing is on messaging. And I would just say that there's a lot of discussion now taking place around, what should our messaging be? What should our messaging be? I'm not as concerned about the pitchy, the message yet, real pithy stuff, the equivalent of what Trump does, crooked so-and-so. I'm not as concerned about that right now. Maybe in a year I'll be. I think to some degree that'll come out organically, because we have to kind of work on all these fronts. So I think people should be engaged in the areas they're most passionate about for now, instead of just focusing on one thing. But I would say that I definitely think we have to be more deliberate in an authentic way. about the economic messaging, because I think when and rightfully so, we're very, especially with this, with these executive orders attacking, you know, uh, immigrants and people from the Middle East and Latin America, most specifically, most keenly, that in Africa, let's not forget, Somalia and Sudan, not a coincidence he happened to pick a couple of black Muslim nations, that I think that we have to incorporate the economic messaging more deliberately. And we've really focused in the first few weeks about sort of this culture war that's taking place. Are we going to be an inclusive nation, or are we going to go backwards and be an exclusive, isolationist nation globally and internally, really not friendly to diverse communities? And so, that's very important. Obviously, it's something I care about a great deal. But I think we have to include in that messaging that ultimately this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not about urban people that are open to diverse lifestyles and are comfortable with diversity. I think that this is ultimately about everybody, even people that at this point are supportive of Trump, because we want not only an inclusive society, we want economic opportunity for everybody. So I think to that point, thinking about last week's executive actions related to attempting to take the teeth out of the Dodd-Frank legislation, the Obama administration, which tightened up regulations so banks wouldn't be as easy for them to make those crazy mortgage deals and unsavory, unethical, and risky financial practices. And so President Trump took steps in the direction of last week on a few orders and memos to sort of repeal those, to take some of the teeth out of those regulations, more specifically a fiduciary rule that the Obama administration enacted that made it mandatory that a financial advisor works solely for the benefit of the client and not for maximum profit. Now, I think you have to put that in as a law. It's kind of disgusting. But Trump actually just signed something that would repeal that. So we're, we have to really look at through this economic lens and really start talking about, I think ACA is an opportunity for that as well. Talking about how, how all of us are going to be impacted, or virtually all of us, in a negative way. Because if we just focus on people that, are messaging just on the culture war, then ultimately it will be an us versus them thing. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So I encourage us to continue to, in a very authentic way. And look, that's going to continue, those attacks, because the next people that are going to get hit, whether it's an executive action targeting legal immigrants or just some of the budget allocations, TANF, SNAP, SSI, como dice lo copone, basic resources, to basically, that child tax credits, that keep poor people either above water, like eating, or help people escape poverty, are going to be under attack in administration, and that's going to hit those people in the upper Midwest and Western Pennsylvania and poor white folks. That's going to hit them real hard, just as hard as it hits us. We've got to, and this is an opportunity to highlight the issues of the urban poor and make those bridges between the urban poor and the rural poor in a way that we need to do to get this country going in the right direction and what's truly going to be the revolution. Let's hear from our homie Tomas Kennedy about what's happening in South Florida and how people are pushing back, resisting Mayor Gimenez's cooperation with the President Trump's administration around Sanctuary City executive order. And then I'll come back to wrap up this edition of Ray's Talk Show. Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. And on the line with us, we're all still trying to decompress and sort of understand the impact of all of these executive actions that have taken place by this administration. And, there's already real life impact with these actions, not only to day-to-day impacting lives of our community day to day, but also sort of the larger political framework of our nation and Latino community. And someone that's on the front lines of this is a good friend of ours to the show. Met this young man at the DNC this summer and been following the work he's been doing in South Florida. Community organizer Tomas Kennedy. Tomas, welcome to Ray's Talk Show.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you for joining us, and a shout out to our mutual friend Albert Garcia, one of my compadres that introduced us over the summer. So, Tomas, you're based in my. Oh yeah, great guy. For sure. So, Tomas, you're based in South Florida, and as many of the people listening to this know, last week, President Trump, or may have been 2 weeks ago, it's been a blur, as one of his many executive actions, basically wrote an executive action related to supporting immigration enforcement and basically threatening most major American cities, which are deemed quote-unquote sanctuary cities, withholding federal funds if they would not cooperate with ICE officials and federal immigration authorities. So, Tomas, can you first of all lay out what this executive action, even though it's badly written, so it's hard to exactly tell, but the spirit of what the purpose of this executive action was that the administration released recently?
The executive action seeks to aggressively withhold funds from cities that do not comply with Trump's federal immigration crackdown. Basically, it attempts to coerce local municipalities to toe the administration line.
And so, for people that a little course in sort of federal and local law enforcement, so the tension here traditionally has been that federal law enforcement puts pressure on local and county municipalities and prisons and jail systems and judicial systems to release, transfer, hold, in this case, immigrants that they suspect or they believe are undocumented. The tension rises when you're a local municipality that's connected to a law enforcement that's trying to build trust in the community, so that when you go into a community, regardless of people's citizenship status, they feel comfortable relaying information, intel, to the police, so that it fosters good policing and making everyone in the community feel safer. The other issue, once people get into the prison system, the jail system of a local municipality or a county jail system, is that people have Fourth Amendment rights for due process. And so if your criminal proceeding has already taken place, whether you were sentenced, you were released, you were found not guilty, there's certain legal questions around the fact, around the potential legalities of holding someone while the federal immigration authorities are wait to try to begin potential deportation proceedings. So with all that being said, after the executive action was released, most, with one notable exception, American mayors of major American cities like Los Angeles, New York, Boston, of all places, Boston, Philadelphia, my hometown, Chicago, Seattle, very clearly, those big city mayors said very clearly, we're not going to back down after this executive action, and we're going to remain a quote-unquote sanctuary city for all the reasons that we laid out, including there's also a financial issue. It does cost money to hold people, an additional time period, and the other cost to the larger policy impact on the community if that kind of cooperation is taking place. So, Tomas, we have one notable exception, which is your mayor. So, Mayor Carlos Gimenez of Miami, was pretty swiftly came out and said, well, Miami will cooperate with the federal authorities and comply with the executive action. So, Tomas, can you lay out for people that are not, or whether they're in Miami or not, why this was so problematic and what was the, in your opinion and many of our opinion, the faulty thinking of Mayor Gimenez when he made this rash decision?
Sure, and I also want to add that even though most big city mayors came out in opposition of Donald Trump, and in this that here here in South Florida, and the the city of immigrants, Miami, a multicultural mecca of diversity. Our mayor came out, I think hours after Donald Trump signed that executive order, and without consulting the commission, with just went ahead and said himself that we're going to comply, and we're gonna toe the federal line. Yeah, it's shocking.
Now, part of what the mayor's argument was that this doesn't impact a whole lot of people. He initially said hundreds. Now, over the weekend, he said, well, it probably impact closer to 1,500 or so per year. And B, principally, we just can't afford the risk of potentially losing federal dollars for law enforcement, for many things, including a big transportation project that's in the offing in the coming years. So it's basically in his words, not his words, but essentially a small price to pay relatively to potentially losing millions,
Yes.
and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. So what do you say to that argument, Tomas?
So there's an article in the Miami Herald that came out that basically says that over 11 people have already been sent to ICE detainers, and that number increased by, I think, 26 recently. There's been ICE requests to transfer over 1,000 detainees. So this is an issue that's impacting our community now, and it's breaking up families, and it's ruining people's lives now. So the mayor, if he just had a tough re-election campaign, he had to go into a runoff. It's interesting because after his runoff, after he went into a runoff on August 30th against candidate Ray Collazo, he was actually fishing for Democratic votes. He endorsed Hillary Clinton. He came out as a friend of immigrants, very supportive, and now he's completely taking a different line. And like you said, he has tied this to infrastructure money and transportation money. If you look at his ads during the campaign, he has basically tied his legacy a lot into the public transportation system that has been built here in Miami, which happens to be very ineffective, by the way. And and they've not, I have my own qualms about that. But yeah, I mean, it's really embarrassing that he won't actually fight not only for the immigrant community, and he is an immigrant himself. I mean, he's a political refugee from Havana. He fled communist persecution. He won't fight to give others the chance that he had to succeed, but also to uphold his own power. His own municipal power. I mean, it's actually a deeper question, of government.
Notable mayor of big cities that sort of backed down from Trump really quickly, and the fact that it was in Miami and it was a Latino immigrant mayor definitely caused a lot of headlines. And I know that people outside of Miami have been calling into his office and communicating their displeasure with his decision. And in fact, he's been feeling the heat so much he's been blaming you lately, Tomas. And I wanted you to share with our listeners how your involvement in organizing people around this issue has caused him to speak about you a lot in the headlines the last few days.
After the mayor had announced that he was going to go along with this executive order, and after we had gotten news of that people were going to basically be sent to they were going to comply with ICE detainment. There was this rumors that started circulating widely on social media. We have a bunch of WhatsApp and Slack and these other mediums. We have a bunch of rapid response chats to look out for one another and to create instant community basically. So we started getting these rumors that there's ICE checkpoints. There's an ICE checkpoint on 73rd and Dickens in Miami Beach. There's an ICE checkpoint on 54th and Biscayne. And Little Haiti, watch out, So normally, we do take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. I'm not, we're not gonna. If somebody messages me hey, there's an ICE checkpoint, I'm not just gonna post that, like I'm gonna double check. But we got a flood, and there were people saying like, "Oh my God, there's people being detained." And we had like, it was significant. So I posted on Twitter a tweet that basically said, I don't know, reports of ICE checkpoints in these cross streets, and it was like, Mayor Gimenez, your community needs you to act now, and I sent out the tweet, and it got, retweeted and whatever. And but that this has been circulating in social media all morning before that. And the reason why I did that is because I'm not a journalist and I'm not a politician. I'm a community organizer, and I'm an immigrant rights advocate. So if I send something that's wrong, I mean, and that does suck, and it creates anxiety for people. Like that's a bad thing. But if I ignore something and I don't send it out, and it's something that's getting a lot of traction, and that ICE checkpoint is indeed true, and someone that I know or someone that I don't know in my community ends up driving through a checkpoint, they could possibly be detained. And because of Mayor Gimenez's new policies, they will be on the way to deportation. So the mayor goes on Michael Putney's show on Channel 10 yesterday and starts. They dig up my one, because I've been at the forefront of a lot of fights around immigration, a lot of fights against Trump, a lot of local fights against him and other issues. So basically, he dug up my one tweet, and he was saying that he straight up called me, said there's an individual named Tomas Kennedy who created and propagated a lie that there was immigration checkpoints in the community to purposely cause fear and hysteria in the community and advance his political career. And the reason why I think he's also targeted me is because about a week and a half ago, we went to the Miami-Dade delegation hearing, which is a hearing to the state delegation members at the Florida International University. And I was giving a small presentation on SB 82, which is an anti-immigrant bill filed here in Florida that seeks to take away in-state tuition from undocumented students and replace it with nothing. And I heard that the mayor was giving a presentation himself. So me and the people that we were there with, while the mayor was speaking, we didn't interrupt him. We just wrote on signs, Gimenez, you are an immigrant too. And then on two other signs, protect immigrant families. There was no attack on him, no disrespect. Yeah. And we went up behind them.
No, and in fact, Tomas, it was mine. Yeah, you had been quoted saying that it was a pretty amiable interaction. You didn't, it was both of you were pretty respectful towards each other.
We held the sign behind them, and it was awkward throughout his presentation. I'm sure he didn't appreciate it, but afterwards, he asked that we speak, and I went and we spoke. I mean, he was a bit condescending, to tell you the truth, to me and the people who were there, but we had a conversation, and at the end we agreed to disagree. And I was like, I feel like you're wrong, and I feel like history is gonna judge this chapter of America, very unkindly when we look back, and you're gonna be seen as an enabler.
So
you can change that, but he has decided,
and he can change his mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he has decided since then to punch down at a community member, and to keep punching down. And it's a tactic borrowed straight from Trump. I mean, instead of talking about the issue, he's acting like a bully in hopes of distracting attention from this issue and engaging in a personal fight with a community activist.
Thank you, Tomas Kennedy from South Florida, giving us that update on what's happening in South Florida. Very interesting times there and very interesting local politics. You can find Tomas Kennedy, a great organizer and friend, on Twitter at Tomas Ken. So that's Tomas, like the Spanish Tomas. Ken, like Kennedy, Kenn. So Tomas Kenn. Follow Tomas Kennedy on Twitter for latest updates about what's happening at the organizing efforts in South Florida, which many of my friends, besides Tomas, Elbert, and Carlos Odio, many others are engaged in. Things to look out for this week include see how the messaging and the process of the Neil Gorsuch nomination for Supreme Court goes. This is a man that has resume perspective, very strong credentials, and in normal political environments would probably have a fairly easy confirmation process. But because many of us believe this is, as they say down the way, you got Merrick Garland's spot, because the Republicans didn't even give that man the respect to have meetings with him when President Obama was well within his rights and traditions of nominating someone even in his last year of office. So look out to see how much the fight the Democrats put on this nomination and sort of the charm offensive that Neil Gorsuch is going to put. He's going to look very impressive. He's going to look like he's got it together. He's got the family. He's got the whole thing going. But before you make your decisions about what you feel about his nomination, look into his background. He's got some very troubling decisions and a judicial record, really anti-working person, very anti-labor protections, making it harder for women to access health care. I mean, there's lots of issues there. And our man, Andrew Pudster, apparently still the Secretary of Labor nominee, still has not submitted all his paperwork. This man's got a lot of slimy stuff, I think, in his financial background. But this guy's, one of the great evil businessmen of our time. This is a guy of Carl's Jr.'s and has just a myriad of issues as it relates to workers' rights around their pay and, screwing people with minimum wage out of their pay and hours and all kind of issues with this guy. So this might be a victory for us. So keep an eye on the Andrew Pudster nomination. As the DeVos and Sessions nominations come to a crescendo this week, and most likely they'll both get approved ultimately after our tough fights. That should be the next set of nominations, Pudster and others that we should be focused on. Thanks so much for joining Ray's Talk Show. Again, check us out at rayspodcast.com for all of our content. Download, subscribe our podcast anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and all the above. And you can always catch us on social media, very active on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, RAYS Podcast. Continue the conversations about how we, whether it's through politics or personal development, really create the life that we want to live together. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.